What it is, cooks this? It's your boy the Hater, and I just read an article about Rhea Ripley commenting on women's wrestling. So I thought, what better than to make today's video about the Hater commenting on women's wrestling. Now, here's the caveat, cucks, right? Let me put it to you this way. Inherently, there is nothing wrong with women wrestling. Of course not, right? Women are approximately half the population, and thus, because of that, it makes sense that there would be a segment of the population that would be interested in women wrestling. No problem at all, right? The issue that I have is the overexposure of women in wrestling in proportion to the men in wrestling, right? And the lack of changes that have been made to fit this new expectation that women are going to be wrestling all the time now, right? So, for background, in the past, I don't know, let's say 1999, motherfucks, you'd see a pay-per-view and you may or may not have a women's match, right? Chances are you probably wouldn't, right? And chances are if you did, it might be in some sort of mixed tag situation. Now, absolutely nothing wrong with women wrestling, as I said before, right? We have to be honest about the situation, right? The result of back in the day being that there weren't enough women's matches meant necessarily that the women's roster was also very, very small, right? So you'd have like, I don't know, 7 or 8 women in the roster, and you could have any 2 of them, any permutation, have a match, right? A lot of women start out as managers, like Trish Stratus, like Terry, you know, who would still wrestle once in a while, but obviously Trish Stratus became like a full-time wrestler. But you get what I'm saying, right? Now, today, in the present day, women are wrestling like multiple times on every show. Like, it's nearly impossible to have an episode of Raw without 2 women's matches, right? In fact, in NXT, sometimes they have like 3 women's matches and like 1 men's match. So, with that being said, right, the value and the quality of the women's wrestling matches automatically drops, right? This is just basically a fact that is contingent and based upon the reality that the probabilities of women having good matches in the WWE, maybe in other companies too, is lower because they do 50% of the workload, but they do not have 50% of the roster, right? It's really that simple, motherfucks. If you have 25 women and you need 7 of them to wrestle every night, right? Then your choices are limited. So necessarily, some of the women are going to be bad, just like some of the men are going to be bad. But the difference with the men is that you can pick the men that are bad and just not have them wrestle, because you're still going to need, like, let's say 10 men to wrestle, and you have like 100 men. So you just pick 10 of the good ones, right? That, for example, might explain why Ludwig Kaiser is not on TV ever, right? That might explain why Apollo Crews hasn't been on TV since like the last decade, you know what I mean? So what I'm getting at here, cucksters, is rather simple. In my humble opinion, women's wrestling continues to get criticized because it fails to get better, right? At the end of the day, you have to have some factors in wrestling, right, that make wrestling interesting. The first one, these factors should sound familiar to anyone who listens to this channel. This factor is, number 1, charisma, presence, and personality, right? A lot of the women lack this characteristic, quite frankly, because they don't need to have this characteristic to stand out in everyday life, right? If you take someone like Kofi Kingston, right? This guy is never going to stand out anywhere he goes unless he's charismatic. And I'm not saying that Kofi Kingston is the most charismatic person of all time, right? But without charisma, Kofi is not making it to the WWE, right? Without a baseline level of charisma. However, Stephanie Vaquer, for example, doesn't need charisma because she's a good-looking woman and she's going to get that boost, right? People are going to be like, oh, good-looking women make a lot of money. It goes the other way too. For example, Brock Lesnar, right, doesn't need to be charismatic because he's a beast of a man. Anywhere Brock Lesnar goes, even if you didn't know he was Brock Lesnar, he would stand out. Everyone would look at him and say, fuck, look at this guy. He could probably kill all of us, right? The same can be said about Booker T, The Rock, Stone Cold, Kane, The Undertaker player, and many others, right? This is something that hasn't been put as a requirement for women in wrestling, right? Women in wrestling have never been expected to cut promos. They've never been expected to entertain. They've been expected to sit there and look pretty. So pretty girls are always going to be able to get a job in the WWE. Stephanie Vaquer, who's probably my favorite female wrestler right now, right? She doesn't do anything special, right? She doesn't have any crazy-ass moves. Io Sky doesn't have any crazy-ass moves. Neither does Kairi Sane. At most, these women do the moonsault. You know, that's it. If you can do a moonsault, you can get a job in the WWE if you have certain other factors, right? But the factors that make someone good are not required, right? Another factor is size parity, right? So, there are exceptions. Like, for example, Cucky Owens and Sami Zayn, right? But generally speaking, men in wrestling have to have some form of believability, right? Whereas, I can say all day, for example, right? I can say to myself, like, I think, honestly, if I got into a fight with CM Punk, I'd put the money on me, right? But CM Punk might also kick my ass, right? He's a strong guy. He's muscular to a certain extent, at least, right? He has to at least be somewhat wrestling presentable. And there's two archetypes in wrestling. There's enormous fat guy and jacked up muscular dude. Then there's the third archetype, cruiserweight jobber. And based on what archetype you fall into, your career trajectory is going to go differently, right? Now for women, there is no archetype, right? There is basically like a new archetype they're trying to put over, which is like the athletic girl archetype. That's going to be your Bianca Belairs, your Tiffany Strattons, your Jade Cargills maybe. That's it, right? There might be another one here and there that I'm forgetting, but it's like Charlotte, and then Charlotte, right? Like those broads. The other archetype is regular ass girl, right? Roxanne Perez is a regular ass girl. Now, I'm not speaking about her appearance. We've already covered that situation, right? All the girls, if we're being honest, all the girls that WWE signs, maybe not all, but the vast majority of them, obviously, when compared to the general population, are good-looking girls, right? Like, for example, I don't particularly think that, I don't know, Lash Legend is good-looking, but I'm sure compared to average women, she probably would stand out, right? I don't know how, but let's just say she would, right? This is an example, you know what I mean? Like, that's the idea here. I'm talking about their athleticism, right? So Stephanie Vaquer, right, who I think is a good-looking woman, and Roxanne Perez, and Julia, and every one of them basically, except for the four people that I mentioned earlier, they just look like regular people, right? There is no reason that anyone would believe that 5'3" Stephanie Vaquer would beat Charlotte. In no scenario in the world is Stephanie Vaquer beating up Bianca Belair. It's not happening, motherfucks. Now, the same thing can be said with male wrestlers to an extent, right? There is no universe in which Samoa Joe has any chance against Lashley, right? But that's an outlier, right? There is a chance that Dolph Ziggler could beat Lashley based only on appearances. I would take Lashley, of course, but, you know, there is a chance, right? Because they're both athletic guys. They can both give it their shot, right? But with the girls, it's just regular girls. Like Kairi Sane, like, cannot beat the average woman. Like, of all the girls that I know, I'm pretty sure all of them would beat up Kairi Sane. Kairi Sane is like in the bottom 10% of humans in terms of like ability to kick ass. She's tiny. She's like 90 pounds, you know? So there has to be some believability. This doesn't exist in women's wrestling, so this is why it looks stupid and why people don't like it. Thirdly, right? The levels of athleticism, right? For better or for worse, athletics in the United States and globally are fundamentally centered around men. This is just how it is, right? As I've said in a previous video, sports are invented largely by men, and they're invented largely for male bodies, right? Think of it this way. When basketball was invented, nobody thought that one day the sport would become so popular that it would be filled with 6'10" motherfucks, right? If you're like 6'5" in the NBA, you're short, right? We got people in the NBA that are like 6'10", motherfucks. You know, LeBron, who is 6'8", he's a fucking beast of a human. In the NBA, he's like not exceptionally tall. I mean, he's tall, but he's not one of the taller players, right? You see what I'm saying? The sport wasn't conceived with this in mind. And same thing with wrestling. Though wrestling is not a sport, the presentation of wrestling was not conceived with this in mind, right? You need a very athletic girl to be able to do what AJ Styles can do, right? And that girl is hard to come by. And if she even exists, if there is a woman out there that is as athletic as AJ Styles, which is saying a lot because AJ Styles is a freak athlete as well, you know? But if there is a girl, she's probably doing something better. Whereas, even though AJ Styles is a freak athlete for wrestling, AJ Styles, if you put him in like a running competition against Usain Bolt's gonna destroy him. If you put him in a fight against, I don't know, Canelo Alvarez is gonna murder him, right? AJ Styles is appropriately athletic for wrestling. But compared to women, he's on another level. So women, just like if you did any other kind of wrestling, right? If you change the rules or something, right? Women need to have some sort of smaller ring where their abilities can shine. Since they refuse to do this, and obviously it would make no sense logistically, then it's almost guaranteed that women's matches are going to be worse. Then, the last thing that I want to talk about, the costuming, right? The traditional wrestling gear for a man is tights, right? That's it, motherfuckers. You got those like Frank Gotch and shit. It's just like a dude wearing underwear, right? Which gives you insane levels of mobility. This is because wrestlers were not expected to look good, right? Nobody was watching like, you know, Carl Gotch and like Frank Hankenschmidt or whatever, like wrestle because they're good looking, right? They just wanted to see a fight, right? Same, you can see the same thing in boxing, right? Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury, right? Both amazing fighters, big beasts, right? They're not there to look good. One is bald, the other one is cornrows, so the hair doesn't get in the way. And they're not wearing anything flashy. So that's what I'm getting at here, right? If you, and my fiance is the one who pointed this out, we watched a women's match, I forget which one it was, but she was like, can't you see how often these women are readjusting their gear, their costumes, right? And I was like, no, I never noticed. But she was right. These women, they do a move, they have to make sure their tits didn't pop out, right? This can be obviously fixed, but you would have to compromise on the appeal of the women, which historically has been based around their sexiness, right? Nowadays, you can probably get away with it because there's not many sexy girls, but you get what I'm saying, right? You have to compromise one thing to get the other thing moving. And if you're not willing to compromise, well, then the whole presentation is going to be flawed, right? If Bianca Belair is worried that her titties are going to pop out, you know, she's not going to do the move in such a way that'll make her titties pop out. The move won't look as good, right? Furthermore, the costumes just get in the way, right? All the Japanese girls, they wrestle with tassels, right? You don't even know what the fuck's happening. Tassels everywhere, hair extensions falling off. It's a complete mess, you know? It's not clean, it's not neat. And that's the problem, right? We need people to take the presentation seriously. I understand that women need to show off their assets in wrestling because that's just how it is. But if you want wrestling to be taken seriously for women, they need to just dress differently, right? So that the match quality can improve. Obviously, also, they need to, like, there's women out there who I'm sure are incredible in the ring. They're just not good looking enough to make it even in independent wrestling companies. You know, they're not good. Like, you go to independent wrestling companies, you'll see some broads that can wrestle, but you can just look at them, you're like, these girls are never going to be good looking enough to be in WWE, right? They're not good looking enough for WWE. Simple as that. Same thing for men. There's some wrestlers in the indies who are incredible wrestlers, right? They're entertaining, they have charisma, they have all these things, but they look like they never went to the gym before, right? So unless the lottery falls on them and they're the next Cucky Owens, shit's not going to happen, right? The long and short of it is this, Cucks. We need the presentation of women's wrestling to get better, and it's as simple as that. Until then, women's wrestling just isn't as good, you know? And I will end with this. As I've said before, let's take, for example, I don't know, Ridge Holland. I just pulled him out of a hat in my mind, motherfucks. It's going to be Ridge Holland tonight versus Tyler Bate, right? What match do you think is going to be better? I just picked two random guys that aren't like great wrestlers or anything like that, right? What do you think is going to be better? Ridge Holland versus Tyler Bate or Rhea Ripley versus Bianca Belair? Now, I know some of you are inclined to think that it's going to be Rhea Ripley and Bianca Belair because they're bigger stars. But they're not better wrestlers. Bianca Belair is not a better wrestler than Akira Tozawa. No way, motherfucks. Akira Tozawa is better than every female wrestler, maybe in history, right? He's better than most male wrestlers. If you watch Tozawa's stuff in Dragon Gate, Tozawa's an excellent wrestler, right? He's not giving the push. But the idea is the standards cannot be kept high or even be made high if they don't prioritize the things that make standards high. The factors in what makes a good woman wrestler and a man wrestler are different, right? But there are overlaps. That's where the exploitation needs to happen so they can find people that can do the job well. Until then, we're all fucked, motherfucks. And since I'm rolling along with it, I'm going to finish you guys out with the catchphrase of the year. If you smell, that's not it. This is it. 4 letters, 1 word. Aha! Cuck.